I think we are.
Yay, we're live.
Looks like
Welcome
we're
to the
live.
Wilderness Season podcast launch. Woohoo!
Yeah.
Woo!
Yay.
We did it. We did it. And I'm so excited to have you guys all here today. And we're going to talk about, first I want to start with everybody that's out there in the chat, or if you're Facebook Live, I want you to type in where you're from. I love to see where everybody's from and what city and state, or if you're overseas or wherever you're at, go ahead and type in where you're from and we can look at that. If you're in Zoom, it's in the chat. If you're on Facebook Live, you can type it in the Facebook Live. So it is finally here, and we are so excited that we get to do this Wilderness Season podcast. I know a lot of people are in a wilderness season right now, especially with everything going on in the world. And we just want to be here to help those out that are going through really hard times in a wilderness. So my name is Sherry Ward, and I'm the CEO and founder of Square Tree Publishing. And I started this podcast called The Wilderness Season because I have a heart for people that are going through it. And we'll talk a little bit more about defining the wilderness. For me personally, it was 14 long years, but I'm finally out and I want to help other people. And I want to introduce Rob, and Rob is our reoccurring guest host, and he's really been through it as well. So Rob, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Rob Miner. I am a high school teacher in North Hills, California. And I have been through the wilderness, arguably several times. It's hard to define the wilderness because it's a journey. You know, I like to compare it to the Abrahamic journey, you know, to some degree, from the point of God's call in your life to the point of fully realizing your promised land. There's different interlacings of the wilderness season. So it's exciting for me to be able to share my experiences and things that I've learned through those experiences with other people.
Awesome. So what I want to kick it off with is, what is a wilderness season? So we're going to talk about that first. What is the way that we're talking about it? I know, Rob, you mentioned this before as well, but a lot of the preachers or teachers that are out there in the Christian community, they say, oh, well, we're in a wilderness and now we're not, and now we are, and now we're not. And, you know, they've been in and out like 5 million times. And to me, what they're really saying is they've been through some hard times and trials. And the way that we're defining the wilderness is like a Job season, where you just get slammed on every area. It just seems like you get hit financially, you get hit health-wise, either yourself or your family. Your family's impacted by it. It seems like every area of your life is getting slammed, either all at once or sequentially, and you just feel completely stripped away of what you were hanging your hat on, identity, how you were feeling, what you thought success was, how you define success, even as a Christian, and the way that you were going about life was now just, you kind of get slammed over and over again. So that's the way that we're defining the wilderness. And for the way that we're doing this podcast, it's going to be that particular season, not like it comes and goes, but this journey, however long it is. And honestly, it's usually more than just days or months, it's years. And if you're already in it, you already know that it's years. So I don't want to discourage anybody, but it is for years a lot of times. And so you're usually, if you're out there and you're going through it, you know that this is true. So we're just here to bring hope and healing and encouragement and revelation and things that we learned through our wilderness season, to just bring you hope through the process. So Rob, what would you say that you would define as a wilderness season?
I'd like to start with this. You know, everyone's wilderness season is different. So in anything that any of us say where you're like, I can relate to this, but I can't relate to that, that's perfectly natural. You know, another example of the severe Job-like season that you can see in scripture is Joseph's final 2 years in the prison. You know, really, you could say his wilderness was a 13-year period, But it was that last 2 years where he interpreted the cupbearer's dream. And in a sense, he saw the way into the palace. He said, hey, tell Pharaoh about me. In other words, he's like, oh my God, this is how I can cross into my promised land, so to speak.
Right.
And the cupbearer forgot, and so the door to his rekindled hope was slammed shut again. And he sat in prison for 2 more years. And so there's a lot of different ways you could define the wilderness. But if I were to define it in terms that we can all relate to, it is where God himself takes you on a journey. And God himself brings you into something that only he himself can take you out of. And so a major component of the wilderness season is a death to control. It's a death to idolatry. It's a death to, believing that the promises of God is ultimately what's going to bring fulfillment. Like if God fulfills his promises, then I will know that God is real and that God really was for me. Well, that's true before he fulfills those promises. And that's kind of the crux of the wilderness is, can we live in that reality before we actually physically see that reality?
It's that hope against all hope, believing and keeping going. And I firmly agree with that. And Lorna, what do you think? I know you've been through a really hard wilderness season. How would you define it, or how would you add to what Rob said?
Yeah, I love what Rob said. Very much a identity crisis, right? Because we're living in a world that so many times we place our identity in the things of the world that are in this world, or our families. And that's pretty much what I did. I found my identity in my marriage and my children and being a mother and a wife. And then when I entered into the wilderness, all that was stripped away from me. And so it was really a journey with God, showing his power and his sovereignty over my life, and then revealing to me the truth that my identity is found in him, and an abundant life and a real life is going to be found in him in that journey. And so we just stripped away those layers, and as those layers were stripped away, he became really more real. It was just a time to not shrink back. It takes faith and courage to really stay in the wilderness, not walk away from God, and put your faith in the things that he has for you. Blind faith, right? And he's always comes through. It's beautiful.
And I love how you said it's like layer by layer by layer. And I feel like that's the season and the journey. It's like, okay, taking this layer off, now taking this layer off. Okay, now we're going to take this layer off. It's not like a Band-Aid that you just rip it off. It's kind of like, I don't know that you could really take that if that were the case.
Yeah.
So Rob, give me one story in the wilderness where you really felt like God came through for you. I know you've got 5 million. You've got a lot. So if you could just give me like one story that just really shows God's faithfulness in the journey. And then Lorna, I'm going to ask you as well.
Well, there's 2 ways I can answer that. There's ways he came through spiritually, and there's ways he came through physically. The most predominant answer is the spiritual answers. There were definitely things he did circumstantially. I had one time in particular where I stepped down my teaching career in faith and got no provision for several months. I did get a few bills, unexpected bills. One day I just lost a gasket, and I just went off. I'm like, where's the provision? You brought me. I prayed until sweat was dripping down my face. Later that day, I went to the bank, and they said something. I don't remember how much it was. It was $500 or $1,000 or something like that. And they said something like, so it looks like you just deposited, or it looks like you just had $500 deposited into your account. And I'm like, well, who deposited that money? And they said, you did. I'm like, no. I kept my mouth shut, but I'm like, did God just literally deposit money in the bank under mine? I still have no explanation for what happened with that. But that was one example, one supernatural example of vision.
Wow. I've heard of stories like that, but that's cool that I didn't know that was part of your story too. That's cool.
Yeah. But I think the story that I want to share, because most of the times God came through was spiritual. And going back to what lornalea said, really it is a journey of identity formation. And there were so many times where I felt like I was at the end of my rope. There was one time in particular where I stepped out in faith. I was sure it was God. He spent a whole week confirming it was God. And then I stepped out in faith and the door just slammed. It didn't just slam shut in my face. I mean, it busted my nose, metaphorically speaking, where I'm like, what was that? It just went pitch dark in my heart. And then the next day, it was just like God opened up the heavens and revelation fell like a downpour. And it was revelation of my life, God piecing all these prophetic puzzle pieces of my life and experiences of my life. And the essence of it all is I'm still on the throne. I'm still totally confused. And yet your presence is so real. Your confirmation that you're still at work and that you've always been at work is so real.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be if I had one story to share, that would be it.
That's amazing.
Let me
like
add
how
this,
you
though.
broke it
I
down.
literally had dozens of experiences like that. That was just the most significant one. But the idea that there were so many times where I was at like the darkest point, where I'm like, I give up, I'm done. And then the next day, God meets me in such a powerful way.
I like though how you broke it down into like there's the spiritual provision and the revelation that comes, and then the circumstantial, and that they're different, but they're both unique and stuff we'll never forget going through it. And I remember going through my wilderness so deep and so many years into it that I felt like Peter when he said, I have nowhere else to go. Where else am I going to go but you, And it's like there's no turning back at some point because you're so deep into this.
Yeah.
That the only way out is through, and you just have to keep going. And I remember that very like, I just throw my hands in the air, like, what else am I going to do but just keep going through this and just hope and pray that there is an end. And I knew it in here, but to get it in here that there was going to be an end to that season was a jump, just standing. I had to mentally just believe, even though in the heart, it wasn't always there. And Lorna, how about you? Like, what is some of your highlight reels for God's provision in the wilderness?
Yeah, just so many. I echo that, so many. But as you were speaking, I just, there was a night, I think it was like 4 years after my divorce, and I was walking on the fence, literally, because one day I felt strong, and the next day I felt like, I don't think I could do this anymore. I was so weak. And so some friends had invited me to go out on a Friday night, and I just felt the Spirit say, no, you're not going out. So I said, no, I'm going home. I opened my mouth and that's what came out. Ended up at home. And I was really trying to avoid God at home. I just kept busy doing things. But I kept hearing that voice, I want time with you. I have something to tell you. And finally, I went over to put some clothes in my washing machine, and I heard like nothing else but this. What is it going to be, me or the world?
Oh, that's a good question.
Seriously stopped, and I was like, is that you, God? And then I kept putting clothes in, and then walked away again. And then I came back to take them out of the washer and put them in the dryer. And once again, what will it be, the world or me? And so pretty much I stopped there, and I was like, I looked into the washing machine, and I just heard God say, I can make you cleaner than this. I have something more for you than this, than what the world can offer you. And I just lost it. I lost it. I was like dripping wet from tears and fell on the floor. And that was when really there was a shift. There was a shift for me. And I knew that my walk with God is serious. This is a serious part of my life. I need to make a decision, and I need to finish this journey with God. And it was that night. I don't know how long I was on the floor or how long I was in a room with him, just a conversation and comfort and filling me up with the strength to go the rest of the journey. And so it was very powerful, but very real for me. I had a choice. I needed to make a choice.
And then at that point, when I'm assuming that you chose God. So at that, I'm assuming at that point, was it like, or like, What happened like after
I was
that?
exhausted after that. I have to say, I was so exhausted. And the days just kind of were normal after that. But then things started unfolding. Like God just, he became more real. Um, just more powerful. That I just experienced him in a deeper way, if that makes sense. There was just more intimacy. There was more understanding. Uh, my faith was in a different place after that night. Don't get me wrong. There were still days I was very much fearful for the things that our family was going through. My son was going through at the time. Uh, and it took a lot of courage, but every day I'd have to, meet with him in the morning and ask him for that courage to get through that day. But truly there was a shift in my heart. Like you said, it goes from your mind and getting it from your mind into your heart. And there was a complete shift and surrender of letting my control go and really letting God have his way, no matter what it was going to look like.
And Rob, do you feel like you went through something similar where did God ever like give you that kind of a question at all, or in a different kind of way? Did you go through something similar?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, feels like it was just 2, 3 hours ago. I'm actually being quite literal. Yeah, several times I had experiences like that. But, it's funny. I do consider that I've come into my promised land. I look forward to doing those recordings, what that looks like.
Me too. I think we all do.
Right. But to some degree, there's still a lot of the same lessons that continue to be reinforced even as you go in the promised land. Like right now, the things that God has put in my heart to do require a level of courage and fortitude that now I didn't have 3-4 years ago when I was in the wilderness. I'm talking about courage and fortitude I didn't have 3-4 months ago.
Wow.
And so I see how everything that I went through was necessary. Because that's a continual battle of who are you really serving? Are you serving an audience of one? And so often we think we are. And then we see our responses to how other people respond to us, or how they don't respond to us, or how God seems to be confirming that he's at work. And at times you're like, are you with me or not, God? Can I get a little support here? And he's like, are you doing it in obedience to me, or are you doing it for some kind of prize of validation? So absolutely, I had an experience like that. And it's been an experience that has continued to have reinforcement throughout the years.
And it sounds like that statement that you made is really based on identity as well. Like who are you going to do it for? Is it for the validation, for identity, for you? How many likes do you have? How many followers? How many downloads? How many this? How many that's? Or are you really doing this for me?
Yeah.
And I remember meeting a Hollywood producer, and he did an interview on a podcast, and I loved what he said. And his story is that he made a movie with Disney, and when the movie released, a lot of the actors were up for Oscars and awards and stuff. And so he's like, yes, we're going to win. And the buzz, how you build the buzz right before the Oscars and all that, or whatever it was. I don't know if it was the Oscars or whatever awards there were. And none of them got it. And he was really bummed with God and said, God, what's the deal? Like we didn't win any of this. And God said, my success and the way that I measure my matrix will never be the same as the way that the world measures their matrix. And then fast forward, he goes on a missions trip to the Philippines in the prisons, and he's speaking to the inmates in the prison, and he's talking about how he made the movie and all that kind of stuff. And then one of the prison guards is a woman, and she starts crying, and he's like, afterwards he's like, okay, did I do something wrong? Why are you crying? Like he wasn't sure what was going on. And she said, I didn't know that you made that movie. And she says, do you realize that every single prisoner that's in this prison has to watch your movie? as
Wow.
part of the rehabilitation before they get out. And again, that word came back to him that the Lord said that the way that I have my matrix of success will never be the way that the world does. And immediately that word came back to him. So that's just so important that it is an audience of one and that what we're doing is for God. And a lot of times we get in this performance and we have to work for God, but it's just being with God and partnering with him, which is different than performance and doing things for God. And there's a level of relationship that gets developed in that wilderness season that's different. So Rob, what 3 things would you tell people that are in a wilderness season? What would you want to encourage them if they're in that, like, really what we call that dark night of the soul and they're just really going through it? What would you tell people?
Are you talking about the 3 primary lessons I learned, or 3 things that I would tell them? Or is it
Let's
2
start
ways
with
to
the
say
3
the same?
lessons and then I'll go to Lorna and then come back. So
Okay.
what were the 3 big lessons for you?
I mean, they're all kind of interlaced, but number 1, my journey began with a prophetic word that started by saying, like, Abraham, I'm going to send you to a foreign land, but first you're going to have to lay down your Isaac. So that was a predominant theme throughout. And if you have watched the 2nd episode when I share my testimony, you know
just
that
back up the 2nd episode of the Wilderness Season podcast, just so you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That whole journey of laying down my Isaac was really predominantly for the purpose of coming to the full realization that my union with Christ really is the pearl of great price. And so number 1, I would say the priority of the presence of God, but I want to define what I mean by the presence of God, because I actually feel God's presence less now than I used to. So when I talk about the presence of God, I don't talk about a feeling. I talk about a reality of union life with him. It's the realization that we are on a journey with God. Like the 25 years that Abraham walked with God was eternally, magnificently beautiful. It's just that he didn't fully realize how beautiful it was. I mean, thousands of years later, everyone quotes Abraham, the father of our faith. But when he was going through it, he was just that crazy old guy who's like, this is nuts. Is God ever going to do this? But it's in the wilderness that God forges that. The pearl of great price really is this idea that God is always with me. He's the author and perfecter of my faith. He's the architect. Every day he is actively writing the script of my life, working all things towards his appointed end. I mean, that is a thrill. I could spend the whole day sitting on my couch doing nothing, and it's still an amazing journey if you understand that context. Number 2, I would say the death to control.
Yeah. Okay, who wants to raise their hand on that one? I will.
Yeah. The control of trying to bring God's promises to pass. The control of wanting to know what's going on, wanting to understand, desperately wanting, God, what are you doing? As opposed to entering that rest and just understanding that he's on the throne, he's in the driver's seat, he's working all things out for good. Just take a chill pill and enjoy God today. Enjoy what he puts in your path. And number 3, as I already alluded to, is refining in you this mentality that I serve an audience of one. That my goal is to respond to God, to obey to God. When we get caught up in how other people respond or the results or how we define the influence that we have, we're going to trip every time. It's learning, God, I'm doing this because you put it in my heart. And if I obey, that's a success, period. End of story. Move on and go to the next thing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I remember my girlfriend one time said, you have to picture it like a roller coaster ride. She said, get on the ride, strap in, raise your hands, and take the picture at the end. It's like- I just love that because it's like, whoa, where are we going? I don't know where we're going on this. And I can really relate to that death of control. I mean, I hate to admit it, but that one probably took me 4 years. And like the nail in the coffin for me was when I had to get to the point in the wilderness season. And I think this is when I finally came out, is when I said, I will be here as long as it takes to get out of me anything that you need to take out of me before I hit the promised land. Because I can't take those things over. And it was death of control of the timing. Because I kept thinking, if I'm a good little Christian girl, if I'm super obedient, if I do every single thing you tell me, I'm going to get out of here faster. And so I was trying to earn my way out, or trying to be obedient to get out quicker. And there was nothing that was going to get me out quicker. I mean, a lot of the preachers we talk about say, oh, well, it should only take 11 days for the Israelites to get into the promised land. Well, yeah, but it wasn't about getting from point A to point B. It was about getting the mindsets and the slavery mentality of 400 years of slavery out of their head, and to be free of those things, to come into what God has us come into.
And Sherry, I just want to add to this real quickly, because this is just a real important value that I carried out of the wilderness. I want those who are hearing to understand, sometimes we get the idea like, I have to perfect this test before I pass through.
Yeah.
I've really come to realize that God knows the ultimate timetables. There's a convergence of times. And so the problem is we don't see what he's preparing us for. And so he's still reinforcing a lot of those same lessons. Like I'm still working through issues of control. It's just there are things that have lined up, and God has needed to move me into certain things to get me in position for those things. And it's just really important that I live out of those lessons that I learned. And if I don't, I feel the consequences in my body or my mind. But this test before I pass through it.
I'm just looking to see comments on Facebook too. Yeah. That is so good. That is so good. And I just can feel everything you're saying. I mean, I know that we've been on the same page, and that's why you're the reoccurring guest host. And so I'm really happy with that. Lorna, what about you? What are your top 3 lessons that you learned through the wilderness?
I'd have to start with, I really learned who my God is. Going through the years before I was taken into the wilderness and stripped of everything that really I loved and valued in life. I knew who God was, right? I was the good little Christian girl, like you said, right? I was always trying to fix things, make us look good, everything, the perfect little package, the house with the white picket fence, all that. And it was, and yeah, I went to church and I read my Bible and I was involved in Bible studies, and I knew God, but I knew him in a whole different way than I know him today. And had I not gone through that wilderness, I would not have experienced God's power, his sovereignty over my life, and the love and grace that he has for me and my family in those tangible ways that I was able to experience him through the wilderness. So I would say, knowing who my God is today, and that he's got this. As much as I still want to put my hands back into things and try and fix it or hurry it along, he's got this. Right?
Yeah. We all wish we could hurry it.
Right, like, let's get moving.
Can I just help you and scoot this along? Yeah.
We could be way over here by now, right? But no.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Exactly.
Spoiler alert, it doesn't work.
Yeah, we don't, spoil alert for sure, right? And that he is faithful. And I learned that. I mean, it can be scary. We live in a scary world. There's a lot going on. A lot of bad things can happen. And so when we're in that pond, so to speak, and that wilderness, and things are chaotic and happening faster than we can really process them in our mind and our heart, God is faithful. He is in it. He has a plan. And if we can sit with him long enough, to hear what he has to say and really understand his word and who he says he is in his word, then we can experience it and walk it out in a whole new way, where there is no doubt. We can really stand strong and say, no, I know who my God is. I'm going to get through this. We're going to get through this. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know we're going to get through it. He's not going to abandon us. He's faithful. And then just, I always try to tell myself, don't shrink back. It's so easy for me to pull back and kind of freeze for a moment. And where's my faith and my trust in God, right? So being able to just step forward and step into it with the Lord, trusting him that it's gonna be okay. It might not look the way I want it to look. It might not feel the way I want it to feel, but it's gonna be okay because he is our God, and he knows the ending of our story. And so really, it was really about trust and learning who I am in Christ and who my God is.
I agree with that. And I think when we're talking about letting go of control, the opposite of letting go of control is trust.
Mm-hmm.
So they're on opposite ends. So once you start letting go of control, then that trust comes back. And I remember just chasing a lot of things before, chasing things in business, chasing the money, chasing this, chasing that. And when you let go of that control and you trust, there's a peace that comes in that, because you're not chasing anymore. It's trust, and you're just trusting that God's got this.
Mm-hmm.
You may not understand it, and a lot of times you don't,
right?
But you just have this deep knowing in your spirit of trust, and people pick up on that. People can feel that as you're moving forward in that. So as we're continuing on this live, if anybody has any comments on Facebook, let us know, and we'll go ahead and answer those. Rob, what would you encourage people with? Like people that are like right in the middle of it, going through it, just really heavily in the middle of it. What would you encourage them with? What would be the 3 things you would encourage them with?
Can I just quickly respond to what you said a minute ago first, just because I want to add something to that. You were saying that in the wilderness, you were constantly chasing, like I'm sure we can relate to that. It's like there's a striving mentality to try to make something happen.
Yeah, or performance. Yeah.
Right. And when you come out of it, you're still working. It's not, I think sometimes we feel like we need to go into this passive mentality of waiting on God. It's just there's a difference between striving to make something happen and responding to God. So just want to make that clear, because sometimes we can overanalyze, like, am I striving or am I responding to God? The answer is found in your level of rest. Are you at peace with, the consequence? It's a different level of peace or disposition. But you asked me the question, what would I tell people who are in the midst of it? I think if there is one thing I would say, it helps every now and then to take a step back and look from an eternal perspective. Paul said these light and temporary afflictions are not even worth comparing to our eternal glory. And the thing is, in our busy lives, we don't think from an eternal perspective. We're constantly consumed with today or how this is going to relate to our future. Well, our future is millions upon millions of years of eternal glory. That kind of changes your perspective on the future. And it's an eternal glory that is completely in his hands. So that really helps kind of let go of your anxiety and your confusion and your pain. And it's an eternal glory. When we get to heaven, we're never going to have any experiences where we are in the dungeon of darkness of understanding. We're like, God, what's going on? But we, in our darkest hour, we say, but God, I choose to trust you. I choose to go another day.
Amen.
Once we get to heaven, we'll never have that opportunity again. And so when we are in our darkest hour and it feels like all the lights are out, the angels are watching with bated breath, going, oh my God, how's he going to respond? Get the recorder, I had a prophecy once that said, you are published in heaven. I don't really know what that means, but I believe, at least in part, it means like what's happening here on the earth, it's being recorded. Like throughout all of eternity, the choices that we make here on the earth, the way that we respond to God in certain seasons will be remembered.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Was that 3 or just 2? I'm trying to count.
Oh, I didn't know I thought it was just 1.
That was just 1. Okay.
I think that's probably enough for now. Maybe Lorna wants to add to that.
Lorna, what would you encourage people that are really like in the heart of it and going through it? What would you tell them?
That was powerful, Rob. I like that. There's so much. I would want to encourage them that even in their darkest day, their darkest moment, when it feels like there is no way, no how this is going to change or ever get better, to hold on to the truth that God has in his word. Behold, I am with you always. And he is, I know just to say, oh, he is with us, he is with you in it, sounds so, casual, or I don't know what the word would be, but it is true. And we need to really stand firm in that we are not in this battle alone, this wilderness alone. God is faithful, and he's not going to abandon us there. He has a purpose and a plan for our life. And yeah, there may be some struggles and some dark times to get to that purpose and plan. But like Rob said, there is an eternity waiting for us, and there won't be any darkness there. And so that might seem so far off, but this is the journey that gets us there, right? This is the journey that's going to take us there. And if we can look at it in such a way that this too will pass, and we need to just take the courage, the word, the sort of truth, the courage that God has placed into us, and stand firm on his promises that he will not abandon us. He has a plan, and we need to lean in and finish the journey with him. And we will come out into the promised land.
That's awesome. So basically keep going. It's like,
keep going, don't give up.
Keep going.
Yeah.
I
Don't
can't
give
tell you how many times I heard that in the wilderness. And he keeps, even now, he's like, I take like 2 steps and then I stop. And he's like, keep going. I told you to keep going. And so it's like, okay. And then I take 2 more and then I stop. And he's like, keep going, keep going. It's like, I feel like he's trying to push me from behind sometimes. It's like, okay.
I love what Rob said when he said, even if you're sitting on the couch, it's still the journey, right? God is a God that's okay to sit on the couch and ponder our day, or think about what is next, or just rest. God took a day of rest. These are the things that he wants us to do. There is self-care, there's spiritual care, and there is a process of doing this with God. And I think if we can lean in and trust him for it, he will definitely, without a doubt, reveal that to us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I remember in my darkest point, I'm just honest with God. I'll just tell him how I feel. And I'm like, God, this is hell. I feel like this is hell. And I kept saying that. And I'm not usually the big cussing kind of gal, but I'm like, this is hell, And he said, knock it off. He said, don't you ever call the wilderness season hell. He said, because I'm in it and it's not hell. And so he like really rebuked me for like naming and calling it that, because it was a journey with him. And it was very painful, but it was a necessary journey that we needed to take together. And I keep calling it like the Australian walkabout, and I don't know, I think I read something that's not even a politically correct term to use. So I'm sorry for any Australians that may watch this later, but it's just kind of that walking journey with God, and one time I remember saying, God, just throw me a bone, would you? This is so painful and I'm dying all over the place. Throw me a bone. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, I'm giving you a steak. It was like, I just didn't even understand. I'm like, I don't get it. But now coming through it, I can start understanding some of those things. So Rob, give me another thing that you would really encourage people that are in the thick of it right now?
To some degree, we've touched on this here and there throughout. It's kind of the central point in that, above all, we're learning to trust God. And that looks a lot of different ways. But what does that mean to trust God? When we're in the wilderness, when I said we're dying to control, what I mean is we instinctively think that there's something that we can do to speed up the timetable. Or maybe there's something I'm doing wrong and that's why I'm still here. Or maybe that's why I'm here in the first place. And, I think one of the scriptures that is so vitally important when you walk through this is he is the author and perfecter of our faith. An author writes a story. The main character in the story doesn't say, hey, can we change that line? It's just, he's writing the script and he's going to finish the script. And I think that's what Hebrews 4 means when it talks about entering into that rest, where it's not to say there's not things he doesn't want us to respond to. Like maybe there's different lessons that we're learning, different things he wants us to work on, different challenges or leaps of faith that he wants us to take. But ultimately, more than anything, it's about letting go and trusting that he started this and he alone will end it.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's really good. And Lorna, how about you? What's another thing?
Wow, I would have to, I just love what Rob said. He is the author and perfecter of our faith. And this is his story. And I think when we do let go of that control or the need to fix everything, make it look the way we think it should look, is when God can really take over and show his power in our life.
Yeah.
And we don't want to miss that. You don't want to miss that. I mean, I know I don't want to get to heaven and him say, wow, the story could have looked so much better over here. Right? But
Yeah.
I let you have your way and this is where we are and my grace has covered all that, which praise God for his grace and mercy, right? But at the same time, I don't want to miss what he has because it can't compare to anything I can even think or imagine, right? And he reminds us of that in Isaiah. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. So if we can stand in that, knowing that he is faithful and finish that journey, trusting him for whatever's on the other side, when we come out on the other side, whatever that's going to look like, and remain faithful, there's no doubt we've already won. We're winners here, right? With Christ. And so if we lose the things of this world, it could be tragic and it's hard and it's sad. But at the end of the day, when we come out to the other side, when we're standing strong in Christ, there's nothing that will ever match that. There's nothing that can match that.
That's awesome. So it seems like the general theme is letting go of control. And especially depending on how you grew up, that can be really challenging because if you did not always have a safe environment when you were younger, or if for whatever your background is. I mean, I know, Anthony, you've got a pretty severe background as well. And I know that, when you've been brought up in that atmosphere, then you learn like, hey, self-sufficiency, I got to take care of myself. I got to make sure I'm okay. I've got to, you've got that embedded in you that really has to get undone as well. Depending what your background is. I know people come from various backgrounds. So I think it seems like the central theme is that letting go of control. And I think for me, that's when I said that statement, I will be here as long as it takes, was what I would consider my nail in the coffin of control. It was my last, like we said, it gets peeled off in layers. That was like my last layer of completely laying it down in surrender when I had to surrender the timing of it. And that was really tough. And you don't hear a lot of people talk about that, but that was probably the toughest moment for me. And again, that nail in that coffin. And I felt like after that, things began to shift because it was like I had finished that season. But I can't give that as a, 5 quick steps to get out of here. Okay, now say that statement, you'll get out. It's not like that because it was a heart thing. And that's what my heart needed. And everybody's heart is different in what they need and what they need to get to that point. And everybody's, nail in the coffin, so to speak, is going to be different. That just happened to be mine. All right, so wrapping it up today, Rob, what's your last encouragement for people that are really going through it in the wilderness season?
I would say just embrace what is. If you watch the second episode of my testimony, when I shared about the journey of laying down my Isaac or laying down my idol, the purpose was to bring me into a greater realization of my union with Christ. And Lorna, you talked about the forging of our identity in that season. And there was a lot of times throughout the season where God reinforced my identity. And there were a few different identifications he gave me, but one that I went back to a lot was the parallel with Abraham, that for 25 years, he was just Abram. He was not the father of our faith. He was not the guy who was the subject of millions of Bible studies and sermons and worship songs for thousands of years to come. He was just an old guy of whom him and his wife had been waiting forever for a promise of God that seemed impossible. And every day was just long. Like, is this ever going to happen? Was that really God? Are we delusional? And so when you see from that perspective, when you anchor into that identity, that really is our strength as we go through. Because you look around the world around you and you're like, the world doesn't see me as anything. I'm just average Joe. Sometimes I feel less than average Joe. Sometimes I feel like completely overseen and misunderstood and unvalued Joe. But I know who I am to God, and I know who I am in heaven. That heaven itself knows who I am, because heaven does see the end from the beginning. The world around me, my friends don't, my family don't. They don't see the end from the beginning. But God is allowing me in that season to get glimpses of what he's doing so that I can anchor into that identity of who I am in him, as opposed to living by the responses of others or how I perceive that others perceive me.
That's good. That's good. And I like that reference you made in one of the podcasts where you said you're either, what was it, following God or like Beautiful Minds? Say that again, because that one was good.
I'm either the crazy guy from the movie The Beautiful Mind, or I'm Abraham,
Yeah.
Before the promise. I'm one of the two. And sometimes I can't tell the difference. In fact, many times I'm pretty convinced I am the crazy guy from The Beautiful Mind. But that's where you anchor back into what God has told you. You anchor back into those stones of remembrance, those memories that you've had with God that were so real. And you say, no, this is who I am, and this is what I'll stand on.
Awesome. Okay, in closing, Lorna, what's your last piece of advice or encouragement for those that are really in the thick of it right now?
So what came to me this morning, I was doing a devotional, and there was a little piece of this devotional that I thought, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. And if it just wraps it up for me. And it says, when you hit hard times, when your weakness is exposed, be ready for the enemy to whisper in your ear, where is your God now? Mm-hmm. And be ready to respond, right? Because we're all gonna be there one day. If we haven't been there, we will be there. And we need to have an answer. Where is our God? Who is our God, right? Well, we serve the most powerful God. He is the God, the most high God. And we need to know, it's so important, we need to know who we are in Christ. And if he's going to take us on a journey to reveal more of that, then stand firm and get ready, hold on tight, because it'll be something that we could not ever dream up in our mind, but it will be a ride to remember. It'll be a journey to remember, and a journey that will strengthen us, prepare us for days that are ahead that we have no way of knowing what is ahead, right? They will reveal more of God's character and his love for his people and for us. And to be able to cling to that and hold on to that truth, that God loves us no matter where we are in the journey, He's there for us, and we need to trust him to get us through it.
That's awesome. And I remember, Rob, you said that at one point in your journey, you just felt like the enemy just come on you and just say, where's God? You know, where's your God?
Mhm. Oh yeah. Did you want me to share that experience?
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
It's a pretty long story. You sure you want me to get into all that?
Well,
I could simplify, I suppose.
yeah, simplify, and then it is in the podcast. So
It is. I
if they
forget
listen
which
to the
one, but it's
podcast,
one
it's
of
in there.
those.
So
Yeah.
the full story.
Yeah. I mean, the basic essence was this. I mean, I had an experience that felt about as much as a personal encounter with the devil as possible. I mean, it was real. And the essence was basically like, are you going to continue to serve God? Like, give me one good reason why you should continue on this journey. And I had no good reasons. I mean, I was like, God had let me down in every regard. Every promise seemed to have fallen to the ground and failed. I felt like a complete train wreck at that point. And in the midst of that experience, God brought back to me a memory. It was actually a scene from a book that I was reading to my students that was the key to overcome. And it is a really interesting story. I wish I could remember which podcast it was. I won't tell the full story here, but the basic idea is this. You know, at some level, your experience may not be as pronounced as that, but at some level, that is an integral component of the wilderness journey, because we have to have that confrontation, like where Jesus said, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you're not worthy of being my disciples. And not half, most of the people just took off. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And again, that is the forging of where we cross over from being followers of God to being disciples of Christ. And that's a whole nother level. Taking up your cross and following him. That's not something we can just be like, okay, I'm going to be a disciple today. No, you have to go on a journey of death to self, of death to the promises of God themselves, for that to be forged in you. It's not something we have the ability to just wake up one day and choose. God has to take us on a journey to brand that identity in us.
I like that. I like that where it's branded in us and it's forged in us. I think that really sums up the wilderness. It's through the journey we get branded, and we'll never forget it. And it'll never go away from all of our lessons and all of
It becomes part of who you are. It's
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
part of your character now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us today. And we want to invite you to the Wilderness Season podcast that we are just now launching. Yay! It is on iTunes, and soon it will be on Spotify and a lot of the other platforms, but for sure it's up on iTunes right now. If you're watching later, check Spotify as well, depending on what device you're on. We'll go ahead and put it in the show notes. And for the first 3 people that reach out in a private message to me, I'll give you a free book of my book called A Journey Out of the Wilderness. So if you want to private message me and give me your address, the first 3 people to do that, I'll go ahead and give you a free book. So I want you to check out our new podcast. If you have any questions, we're going to start. Also, our Facebook page is The Wilderness Season on Facebook. And if you have any questions, we would love to answer questions. If you're struggling through something, let us know what topics you would like us to discuss. And we're really going to be looking at the Facebook posts, and we're going to be posting once a week saying, hey, Q&A, what's your questions? What do you want us to address? And we'll make sure that we do that on our podcast, because we want to make sure that it's really ministering to you. We want to make sure that it gives you hope and encouragement through these tough times. And so thank you for watching today. And we will put all the links in the Facebook post. So go ahead and check those out and check out the new podcast. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for our guests, Rob and Lorna. We just really appreciate everybody who is on the call today. So thank you guys. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.